that, and no, I'm not going to read them over again because that would take 10 minutes, but I kind of did that, I thought, as satisfactorily as I can. Now, do I claim that I have an internally consistent philosophy? I'll tell you what I believe. I don't believe that that kind of philosophy is possible anymore. That the possibility for philosophy, for serious human thought in our time, is that it be negative and critical. But to develop philosophical systems, we're past that. It's not going to happen at least not in the great social construct in which we live at this time.
Very well. Any other questions? Yes, gentleman right here.
This is for Dr. Daniels. In regard to your statement about, you mentioned earlier that there was no evidence other than textual about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm curious about other historic events. What other kind of evidence is there on historic events which you weren't there to witness?
There is probably, this is not something I've studied. I used to be a medievalist, and so I actually read a lot of stuff about things about medieval Christianity. But there is a lot of evidence, I guess, that that Jesus Christ or someone else of the same name actually existed.
Can I clarify the question?
Yes.
So my question is, for a historic event, what else would you use besides a textual resource or something someone had written about to know that that was actually happening?
Well, that's what you'd use: textual sources, you do archaeological sources, numismatic sources, the usual stuff that scholars of the ancient world use. But none of that is going to lead you to a proof of the truth of the transcendental and the supernatural. That's a leap. That's always a big leap of faith. Always.
Fair enough. Yes, are you there?
Based on the definition of faith being believing something based on evidence, you mentioned Stephen Hawking and Charles Darwin, and they both observed the complexity in life, like Darwin observed the complexity of the eye, and even Stephen Hawking talks a lot about the complexity of the universe and the order and the laws. So would you agree that someone observing that complex order in life in the universe, denying that an intelligent mind created that, would you agree that that's some degree of faith to not believe that? Sorry, let me clarify. Would you agree that there's some degree of faith for someone to believe that that came from nothing, that all that design and order came from nothing, though it may point that all that design came from a higher intelligent mind? So would you agree that there's faith being used among atheists, like to think that nothing, complexity came from nothing? Does that make sense?
I think I see the direction of your question, and I'll try to respond to it pretty quickly and fairly. It is, scientists don't believe that something came from nothing. They simply don't. Okay, so that's just not the case. I mean, it seems like ultimately something must have come from nothing, but if you read Hawking's book, you realize that that isn't the case either. I mean, people who use reason in their lives in a philosophical sense, I don't know how else to put it, do not believe that something came from nothing. Some of the bankers around, they used to believe that something came from nothing, and then they found out that nothing is what they had, actually. And maybe the rest of us too, in not too long a time. But, so that's just not an operative principle. And Darwin, the long, hard struggle of his life and observation and note-taking and painstaking thought based upon painstakingly acquired evidence over and observation over many, many years. This is not faith. This is science at its best.
Thank you. A question over here. Gentleman right there.
This question is for Dr. you hadn't gone through any of that painstaking thought, so would you say that you have faith in Darwin's theory?
Well, when I was 18, I actually read The Origin of Species and the Descent of Man, and I've read The Voyage of the Beagle, and I've taken biology courses in high school and in college. It's been a long time now. And I've maintained the habit of, when I taught here, I used to sit in as a grad rep on PhD orals in the sciences, about 4 or 5 every year, because I wanted to somehow get some sense, in math too, of how these people were thinking about things. That was what was really interesting, because I didn't know. I couldn't follow a dissertation in mathematics after all anymore. I never could have. But I can see how they're thinking to some degree. And so I tried to keep that up. And that's what I know about. I have learned some things the hard way myself, about the history of literature, philosophy, foreign languages. And so I know what it means to spend the hard time over a long period of time to learn something well and also to write or produce knowledge oneself. So it's not comparable, strictly speaking, but I suppose, but it's analogous. And so that's where I'm coming from. We can't know everything. No one can, and no one will. And so there are modes of, you accept at a certain point, but you accept it on the basis of reason, not faith. And it's a good question. It's a good question.
Thank you. Question right here, sir? Yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you both very much for good presentations. I always come away with something to ponder. My question is for Dr. Daniels, and it's a follow-up on what was asked a minute ago about basing things from the past on written text. Our understanding of them obviously has to come from something. Archaeology, written records. And you made the comment that, yes, there is written evidence of somebody named Jesus who existed. But then you made the comment that, but the resurrection, no, that just didn't happen. What do you base that on if it is not an a priori assumption that things like that just don't happen?
Well, even a Christian believes that things like that just don't happen. After all, it's only happened once, according to a Christian. And so things like that don't just happen, even for a Christian.
Well, I would submit for a Christian, it did.
Well, okay, it did, but just that single.
Actually, no.
So
what do you base it on?
you cannot, again, what I'm saying is, human reason, I think, is our mark. It is what we have. And human reason does not give us the supernatural or the transcendent or the possibility of one person in history having been resurrected. I simply must say that I simply don't believe it. That's all.
Okay. Are there any questions for Dr. Funk? Gentleman in the front here.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Funk, you gave the definition for faith as that which is or should believe, but I think generally the dictionary, well, most current dictionaries would now say that faith is belief in something for which there is no evidence. Now, given that's not the question. Given that, and the fact that you also said that reason is fallible, senses are fallible, and so the only thing you need to believe that there is such thing as a supernatural power is faith. Is there any such thing as empirical evidence by which, is there any way by which you would discard the belief in God based on reason? And if so, how does that, or if you won't discard that based on reason, how does reason at all support that faith?
Well, first of all, the definition that I gave was from the Oxford English Dictionary. So that is, I consider OED to be a relatively authoritative source.
How high up the list is that?
Hi, how high up?
Yeah.
I think that was 2.4A. So you could actually,
To the question, please.
and so I think the other part of your question was, what would it take to get me to disbelieve, basically, is that right?
Mhm.
And that's right in line with Antony Flou's most famous publication, Theology and Falsification, which is a very short paper that he gave in the original Socratic Club. And in it, he said that for a sentence, a statement, a proposition to be meaningful, there must be some means of falsification. Otherwise, it was meaningless. And so the question is there anything that could convince me that there is no God, that my faith is groundless?
Correct.
And there is. And that is a prolonged absence of the internal testimony